This incident took place one day after school toward the end of the school year, when I was 11 and in elementary school. I used to travel by bus, and my bus stop was at the very end of my very big neighborhood, so it was a good 15 minutes of winding down several roads to get home. I would always walk with a group of older kids that lived near my house, but this particular day, I got off the bus first, so I was far ahead of them. I was about 5 minutes into my walk when I noticed something. A man, about 30 or so, was walking behind me. I brushed it off as someone walking to the park or something. But about 2 minutes later, I noticed he had gotten faster, which alarmed me, so I started walking faster. The faster I got, the faster he got. I was almost on a long road, that is the third to last road I go down to get home, when I noticed the guy was still there. As I turned to look at him, he started sprinting at me. I turned and started running as fast as my short legs could. As he kept gaining ground, I hear something. Footsteps, a group of them. That's when I noticed a group of high school kids walking toward the corner I was headed for. I decided if I got to them it'd scare the man, so I ran as fast as I possibly could. As I got about 10 feet away, the man stopped running and basically threw himself into some bushes. I run up to the group of teenagers and explained to them what happened. They then looked around the general area for the man, but he had fled. They walked with me until I was a street away from home. And when they left, again I noticed a man walking down the street toward me. It wasn't until he was about 20 to 30 feet away that I recognized him as the same man from earlier. By that time, the group of teenagers was long gone, leaving me on my own again. Horribly frightened, as he got in touching distance, I bolted. I ran as fast as I could toward my house, when I noticed he had started running after me, with some grin I could only describe as evil. Finally, I reached my house and ran to the front door, hoping it was unlocked, so I wouldn't have to get the spare key from the pot next to the door. As I get to the door, I noticed my dad's car coming down the road. I guess the man noticed it too, because he immediately ran past me and my house as if he were on a run. I stood there shaking and crying until my dad pulled up, and I promptly explained what happened. To this day, despite being in high school, I'm still not allowed to walk home. I still remember what the man looked like that day, his clothes, his grin, his facial hair, it still haunts me. This incident happened to me when I was a teenager of 15 years old. On this particular time, I was on the phone with my boyfriend and was hanging out on the computer. The house I lived in at the time had giant windows on the first floor. I was in one of the rooms with the huge windows and had opened the drapes to let some light in. While talking to my boyfriend, I had this super eerie feeling that I was being watched. It turned horribly true when I slowly turned towards the window and saw a man in tattered clothes, with sweat dripping off every part of his body, pressed up against my window with his hands cupped over his eyes, and gave me this horrifying smile. I immediately dropped the phone with the cord, and ran into the next room and grabbed the cordless phone. I told my boyfriend what was happening and I started crying, trying to remember if all of the doors were locked. The man had to crawl over a few bushes in order to get that close to the window, which made me feel terrified. That's when the doorbell started ringing. I poked my head around the corner to see the front door, and I saw the man trying to get in the house by opening the door. At this point I'm absolutely freaking out and my boyfriend tells me to call my mom, which I did immediately. My mom answers at work and she told me to hide and call the police. The dispatcher told me to get somewhere where he couldn't see me and get a weapon, if I felt like it would make me more comfortable. I grabbed a long chef's knife and stood sobbing in a small gap between my back door and a hallway, where I couldn't be seen through any windows. Then I remembered that a first-floor window was unlocked. But to my relief, I couldn't see or hear the man anymore. Eventually, I hear a loud rap on my door, and I slowly went to investigate it. And alas, it's a policeman. I have been in a state of lifeless panic till now. He asks me to come outside with him so he can look in the house and make sure the man didn't find a way in. Right after we get outside, my boyfriend's stepdad pulls into my driveway, as my boyfriend had called him to come check on me, for he was out of town. He lets me sit with him in his car, while the policeman, gun drawn, checks out the house. The cop never found anything, no trace of the guy, no nothing. This incident has truly left a nightmarish impact on my mind. I was terrified and scared to stay home alone for quite a long time after that. I still freak out when my doorbell rings, when I'm not expecting anyone, and I'm terrified that I'll find someone else staring at me through windows whenever I'm alone in a place with ground-level windows. This happened to me while I was hiking alone in the mountains. I was on a track that if one wanted to walk had to come through the woods way down below. So as I made my way back down to the tree line, I headed into a clearing and decided to take a moment to rest. I took off my hat, took in a breath, shook off dust and pebbles, but suddenly I just became very aware that I wasn't alone. Normally, when this sense kicks in, there's a deer or moose or bear nearby, or at least some animal. Checking, I turned towards the trees and saw a man all clad in black just staring at me. He was completely motionless and didn't look like an inch of hiking or climbing gear on or around him. I thought it was odd, so I wanted to snag a photo, so I reached out for my camera, but when I stood back up, the dude was just gone. Right after that, I got flashbacks of that scene from David Fincher's Zodiac, when the killer appears by a tree at Lake Berryessa and then disappears. I was extremely spooked. Now of course, I'm in the wild, surely I'm not the only one out there. But this was in a relatively remote spot, and I hadn't come across anyone until then. I get the feeling to check the area where I saw this person. I was on high alert for some intuitive reason, but when I passed by where he or she stood, there was no one to be found. I looked around and even called out, but nothing. After checking the area for some time, I started getting anxious about the whole situation, and immediately made my mind to rush back. It took whole 8 hours back down, but along the way I still came upon no one, not even one single soul was seen. This day still gives me goosebumps to think. Who was the man? What was he doing all alone there? What would have happened to me if he had made any action? Was I really alone there?